Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tinnitist TV. Today, I am talking to Andy Shauf. You know, a lot of songwriters like to think of themselves as storytellers, but Shauf is someone who truly deserves the title. Over the past half dozen years, the Saskatchewan-raised, Toronto-based singer-songwriter and multi-instrumentalist has made a name for himself with narrative concept albums like 2016's The Party and 2020's Neon Skyline. With his eighth studio release, Norm, Shauf raises the bar again with a beautifully creepy tale of romance, obsession, and misguided faith influenced by the pandemic, true crime TV, and David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, among other things. For my money, it's the most compelling work of his career so far, which is really saying something if you've heard his other albums, and even more impressive for a disc that wasn't supposed to be a concept work in the first place. A couple of weeks before Norm arrived, Shauf zoomed in to talk about his literary aspirations, taking Norm on the road, whether everything's okay, and plenty more. Enjoy. Oh, and spoiler alert. While we don't give away everything during our chat, we do talk about some of the album's plot points, characters, and themes. So govern yourself accordingly. Hey, Andy Shauf, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. Thanks for asking. I'm almost at a loss as to where to start. I guess I'll start by saying that I have to give you utmost compliments on Norm. It is one of the most interesting albums I have heard in a long, long time.
Well, thank you.
Oh, you are most welcome. Thank you for making this thing. It's the first album I can think of, maybe in my entire life, where I'm kind of reluctant about how much to say about it because you don't want to give away spoilers.
hmm
So I guess maybe where we should start is, to you, what do you want to say? What is the album about?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think, I mean, it's a story, but
Yes.
it's a story about, it's kind of a bunch of different misunderstandings of love and what love could be. It's a story that follows someone who is maybe a little bit disconnected from reality and is yeah, unsure of of what is yeah,
hmm
it's a very dark story as
Yes,
well.
thank you. It is. That's one of the things I love about it, is that it is a beautiful album. It's lovely sounding and sweet in many ways, and yet it is really, really creepy.
hmm
Um, it almost makes me want to ask if everything's okay.
Everything's great.
Good. Okay. Just wanted to check. I'm not going to ask you a lot of personal questions, but are you in a relationship right now?
um, kind of. I mean, at the start of something, but
Okay.
yeah,
Because I
not
wouldn't think this would be the kind of album that would help you in that regard.
well, it depends, I guess. I mean, certainly not if you're I don't know. I mean, I've it
It's kind
depends
of
how
like
you
pulling up
interpret
for
the
it's kind of like
record.
pulling up for your first date in a white van, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Um, so where did this all start for you? I mean, where did it start with one song that grew into a story, or did you kind of have the idea for a story, or sort of where did it spring from?
Yeah, I have written concept albums in the past.
Sure.
I've when I was starting this record and writing this batch of songs, at the very beginning, I kind of decided, for a number of reasons, to scrap the whole idea of a concept record.
Mhm.
And so I started out kind of just with the idea of making an album called Norm, and I was going to make it a collection of like a normal album, a normal collection of songs where they were unrelated and maybe they were still stories that's kind of been how I've been songwriting for the past whatever 15 years or so has been with characters and writing fictional plots.
Yeah.
Um, at a certain point in the songwriting process for this, when they were still normal songs and unrelated, I wrote a song called Telephone, which is the third song on the record. And the first verse is you get the impression that this person's really longing to talk on the phone with someone, a romantic interest. And in the second verse, it kind of shows you the perspective of the person who's singing the song or the narrator, where they're calling on the telephone, but they're looking through the window. And I wrote it thinking that it was funny. Like, it's a really beautiful song, really beautiful sounding song. If you listen to it thinking that it's a really beautiful song, by the end, you might think, oh, that was a nice love song. But if you look really closely, you're going to see that something is obviously wrong with this song and this person. And when I wrote that song, I kind of made a mental note like, this could be the character of Norm. And I kept that idea, and some of the songs that I was writing for this normal collection of songs just ended up involving this character again and again. And by the end of when I was happy with the music that I had in this batch of songs, I kind of looked at the whole thing and tried to figure out if I could connect them all to make, instead of writing a linear narrative, I sort of wrote until I could move all the pieces into being a collection that was linked as a story.
So how many songs in all was that?
I think I only have two or three outtakes. There
Oh,
was one spot on the album that I wrote the song about three times trying to get it to work,
okay.
because I knew what I wanted that song to do, but I didn't. I kept disliking my attempt at it. So I finally, yeah, there's probably like 15 songs total or something.
That's not too bad for you because you've done way more than that, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes, yeah, okay.
this was a way more efficient approach
Okay.
where
And I
I
mean,
wrote with what I had. Yeah.
yeah. And for a guy who's kind of been a self-professed control freak, I understand that you brought in a story editor to help you deal with the plotting and the flow of all this. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was more so at the very end of writing when I had my big document full of lyrics and was moving everything around. When I got to the point where I thought that I was finished, I realized that most of what was happening, or I realized that a lot of what was happening was reliant on knowledge that maybe wasn't obvious or even on the page at all.
Hmm.
Because in writing and rewriting and changing things, I was relying on my own knowledge. So I decided to reach out to my friend Nick Olson, he's a writer and a close friend, and I sent him kind of the whole document, all the songs, and just said, "What do you make of this?" And he wrote back his interpretation, and I was like, "That's pretty close." So I changed a few things where I could see how he was being misled by certain details, and sent it back to him and said, "What about now?" And then he sent it back, and I think it was three or four times back and forth till he interpreted it the way that I wanted it to be interpreted. And then he had a few more suggestions of how you could tighten it up without giving it all away. And
Hmm.
yeah, it was a very helpful part of the process that I've never really reached out for story help before, but I never realized how much of it you can actually just be missing out on, how much you can be missing out on with, getting someone else's perspective.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously I didn't see it before, but the end result is great. I mean, because it is there is still a plot, there is still a narrative, but it's just kind of vignettes almost that take you, you kind of bounce from this to that, and then there's that section at the store, I guess, which is kind of a pivotal moment in the whole thing with what's going on
Hmm.
with all the people. Um, the other thing that I found really interesting is the way you use multiple voices through it and kind of bounce between them, which is something I know you've done before, but in this one, I don't know, it really, I don't know, I just can't say enough about how well crafted this one is, which is not to slight your other work, because the party and Neon Skyline were, praised and deservedly. This one feels to me like it's just another step up, though, you know?
Yeah, I think I learned a lot with with the party and with the Neon Skyline. And the Skyline, it was my first attempt at trying to craft like a linear story and have a plot and a rise and fall or whatever. And I think I guided the story a little too much. There's kind of no room for anything but
Right. This one has some nice
the story.
holes in it. Like you can interpret it. I mean, when I listen to it, and again, I think when you have the lyric sheet, it's a vastly different experience, right? Because you can
Hmm.
really understand what's going on as you switch between the voices. But when I got to the end of it, I went, "Oh wow, what a great story!" And it made sense and it hangs together, and I understand what happened. But I can also see how you can interpret it in a couple of different ways, depending on how many characters you think there are and who's
Yeah.
talking at what point to whom.
Hmm.
Um, let's go back a little to talk about the music. You talked about, I think you mentioned in another interview I read something about wanting to approach the music in a different way, more melody driven as opposed to chord driven. How did how did you approach that going in? I mean, is it a matter of sitting down to write it at the piano instead of the guitar, or with the clarinet instead, or what? How did you sort of get into that? What frame of mind?
Yeah, it was pretty much just putting the guitar down and sitting at the piano.
Hmm.
I think what really opened it up for me was I did this sort of it was like a gear challenge where this company wanted people to try out a synthesizer. And so I tried out the synthesizer and I wrote telephone actually,
Hmm.
starting it with the synth melody. And what I had been writing a lot on guitar. Neon Skyline was all written on guitar. And what I was finding was that I was lacking a lot of space musically. The guitar just has so much rhythm built into it, where yeah, it's all rhythm, it's all chord structure. You're placing a melody on top of those chords. You can change the chords, but it gets a little too rigid. And when I was writing on the synth and melodies on piano, I was finding that in figuring out how to support them after the fact, there was a lot more space left over, and you could kind of support things where you wanted to and leave space where you wanted to. And it was an important reminder to me to leave space in the music because I didn't realize how busy I was starting to make things, and
It's not
space
too
was
bad.
always really important.
It wasn't like you were doing bebop or anything, but I mean,
Yeah.
it is true that I think Miles Davis famously said it's all the notes you don't play, right? And that's and again, it makes a perfect parallel with the spaces you're leaving in the narrative and in the lyrics. So it kind of all fits together really nicely. I think I read somewhere that you mentioned Mulholland Drive having an impact on this, and I mean, I can sort of see that in terms of mood and again narrative voices and characters kind of being blurry. Is there more to it beyond that?
It was a yeah. I was at a point in the story where I didn't know how to end it. I didn't know how much to give away. I didn't know how much I wanted to tie it together neatly so that it was well understood who was talking and what had happened. And I was watching Mulholland Drive, and it came to this scene where there's a key sitting on a table, and the frame just kind of like stopped, and it looked like it was really slowly zooming in. And I watched it for a few minutes, thinking like, "Wow, this key is really significant to the whole thing." And this is such a slow zoom. And then it was like 3 minutes, and then it was like 5 minutes. And I was thinking, wow, this must have been like chaos in theaters. Like people would have been so confused, and it's building so much tension. And then my browser just crashed. And I had been watching just a Frozen movie for about 5 minutes, giving all this significance to it. And it was it was nice because I mean it was funny. I laughed at myself and felt like an idiot, but it was good at the time because it showed me that there is a lot to a story that is up to interpretation. And if I if I don't want to end the story neatly, I don't have to. And so I kind of wrote it up to a certain point and then left it open. Like I don't think it's that hard to figure out what happens at the end, or if you pay attention to the details, you're gonna know. But it's a really dark story, but I wrote almost everything except for the dark parts.
Hmm.
There is a little bit of darkness in
Yeah.
the song Sunset. There's certainly darkness, but I didn't show anything morbid. I didn't There's
Yeah.
nothing violent about it. It's
Yeah.
it's
It's like
all
Psycho. You never see the knife going in.
yeah.
So when you're actually putting this thing together, like technically recording all this stuff, are you generally, is there a set way you approach it? I mean, do you work on one song at a time and do them in order, or is it all random and piecemeal, or are you sitting down and recording like all the piano parts for the whole album at once, or what's your kind of process when you're really deep into it?
My process lately is that I work on something until I get stuck, and then in a really practical way, I make a whole list of the songs,
Mhm.
and I start at the top and I put a check mark beside it when I get stuck, and then I move on to the next one, work on it till I'm stuck, and I kind of just keep going down the list until I feel like I have nothing more to change on them. It's kind of a really practical way to just keep momentum because you can do it where you are recording all the drums at once or all the piano at once, but at a certain point you just start like not phoning it in, but you start to get tired of that process and
Sure.
you start to repeat yourself. So I find that just opening something, first impression, what do I need to do? Do that. If you don't find anything else to do, move on to the next one. And it's just kind of always just changing things and until there's nothing to change.
So, I mean, at some point you just decide, okay, that's it. When I can't think of anything more to put on this song, it's done.
Hmm.
Okay.
Or yeah, pretty much.
All right. And is that something where, because I can see, you can easily go down a rabbit hole with, you know what, maybe it just needs a little tambourine, or one
Yeah,
more thing, or one more thing, or one more thing. Are you pretty good at self-policing in that regard?
I am, only because of how much recording I've done on my own.
Hmm.
So I have a pretty quick, this is going to work or this is not going to work. I'll write down a million notes of things that I can do. And as I try them, it's kind of immediately obvious if something's going to work or not. And yeah, it's just a result of recording too much.
Right. Um, this would seem like an album that wants to be performed you know, in its entirety. Is that
Mhm.
what you're planning to do with it live?
We're planning to do yes, but we're going to break it up into chunks so that it's a little bit more easily digestible, maybe.
Oh,
We're
so like
gonna
you'll do
we're
like
gonna
three
play it in
songs?
three,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, 4 songs at a time, and then we're gonna play some old songs to break it up a little bit. But there's so many transitions and songs that lead into other songs that,
Mm.
yeah, we definitely. I'm looking forward to that a lot, seeing what happens.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, and again, it's you know, it's interesting because on the one hand, this is an album that you could play at brunch, you know, or you could play at a cocktail party, or you could just put on in the background with people, and they'd think, oh, what, you know, this is really lovely. And then when you handed them
Mhm.
the lyric sheet, they would, you know, run aghast from the room. But you know, well,
Yeah.
I'm exaggerating, of course, but you know, I just love that it's got those two sides to it. You're clearly an album guy. Um,
Mhm.
do you have favorite concept albums that you know are an inspiration or that sort of started you down this road?
Um, some of the Pedro the Lion stuff, like
Hmm,
Control. Um, but yeah, not really. I mean, it kind of was more born out of writing story songs and then trying to link them together. Like I have an album called The Bearer of Bad News where the last 2 songs are the same story from a different perspective.
right,
And when I wrote those 2 songs, it was like felt like this door opening, like this is something that you could really expand upon. And that's kind of where it came from. And I made this EP that I tried to write 4 songs into a story, and it was a kind of a mess. But it's just been this desire to, you know, an album as a format to tell a story
right.
is I just think that that's there's so much you can do with it. And to be honest, when I listen to music, I'm like barely picking up on lyrics. So I don't
Okay.
know why I have such high expectations for listeners, but
No, you're aiming high, but for a true concept album, you'd have to have a double. You're going to have to make a double album at some point, right?
I never thought of that. Now you've really done something.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Don't tell the label it was my fault. Um, and I can't be the first person to tell you. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you that your stuff obviously makes people think that, oh, well, you know, you could write a musical or should write a musical, or you know, do you have any aspirations or ambitions or offers in that regard?
I have a desire to write outside of music and outside of the limitations of song structure. Um, it's something that I'm looking forward to exploring a little bit more, but
As in, like writing a
yeah,
novel, you mean, or
or short stories or kind of anything. Like I just enjoy writing stories, so I would like to try my hand at some other format of it.
were you into that as a kid? I mean, when you were, you know, in your teens in high school and all that, did you write stories?
No, I was a sports guy. I was really into skateboarding and um yeah, the story thing really just came out of songs. There was a certain point where I realized I was writing a lot of really personal songs, and when I went to perform them, it was kind of like you're reliving these things over and over. And if you're writing about your life, there are people involved in those songs as well, and you're reliving it for them, reliving it for yourself. And so, really early on, I decided, like, I'm gonna give the story song thing a shot. And I was listening to Randy Newman a lot back then, and he
Sure.
kind of does a lot with inconsistent narrators and characters. And yeah, I just thought that that was an interesting way to do it, and I've just kind of been learning as I go from there.
So are you working on some short stories now or?
Trying to when I have spare moments. I've been working on a lot of music and it kind of occupies my whole mind, but soon enough I'm gonna try switching over to the that side of the brain again.
Is that intimidating?
It is, and it's so hard because I mean it's such a different structure. Within songwriting, I really appreciate the limitation because
Hmm.
you can you can use different tricks to get imagery, and you don't have to have sentences that flow well, and you don't have to have
Well, yeah, you're working inside the
sentences at
box,
all.
you know, I
Yeah,
mean, a
exactly.
smaller box when you're just trying to stare at the blank page, the options
Hmm.
are limitless, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, I've been enjoying that. Just trying to start writing and see what comes out of it, and it's a cool challenge. And it'll probably be decades before I have anything that's not horrendous. But
Who do you read? Who would be some authors that you would think, oh, you know, if I could do what they're doing, I'd be happy.
yeah, George Saunders,
Mm.
I enjoy his stories a lot. Um, Lydia Davis, I'm reading like a Lydia Davis collection at the moment. Yeah, I really like Raymond Carver and like Dennis Johnson, those kind of like really to the point kind
Yeah,
of writers, plain spoken. Um, yeah, kind of I like reading a lot. I like seeing what different people do, different people's techniques.
yeah. Well, you've got a lot of time to read, I'm guessing, on the road.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
true.
Speaking of, is this going to be all summer long on the road with this album? Is that the plan?
Uh, we'll see. We're definitely touring starting up pretty soon until the spring, and summer's not quite penciled in yet, but I'm trying to have a little bit of a balance because, post pandemic, I've kind of settled into somewhat of a routine and I have a bit of a personal life again. Before that, it was just nonstop touring and being on the road all the time, and I would like to strike a bit more of a work life balance in
Cool.
the present and the future. So
And you've got the resources and all that to do that. Like you can do that without sort of having to, you know, scrape around and try and, you know, return bottles and empties to buy lunch.
yeah, well, I quit drinking, so I quit
Oh,
drinking. I quit all the vices I had. So there's a lot more room in my budget these days.
all right. You're gonna be a non-drinking writer, are you?
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of soda water.
All right. Listen, my friend, I could talk to you all day long about this album because I really love it, but I know you've got other stuff to do. So I'll just say thanks for your time today and thanks for this album and all the rest of the music and best of luck with the writing and everything else coming your way.
Thank you. It's
All
nice
right.
to talk to you.
See you somewhere down the road.
Yeah, definitely.
Bye.
See ya.